justice for all.
Thank you. Gentle reminder to silence your cell phones, and we can roll forward. First on the agenda is the approval of the agenda.
Move it.
Second.
Assuming there are no additions or corrections? Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next is the consent agenda. Any additions or removal from the consent agenda?
I'll move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next is public appearances. Do we have any public appearances this morning? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to property services. Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. I don't think I've had the opportunity to meet all of you yet. So my name is Spencer Crawford, Deputy Zoning Administrator for Nicollet County. So today we have a conditional use permit request from Novel Annika Solar LLC to establish a large solar energy system. It consists of 2,070 solar panels on about 5 acres of land located along 475th Avenue, owned by Joel Inter, and the power generated is going to be sent directly to the electrical grid for distribution. So the property is currently being used for agricultural production. It's a farm field right now. And there's an existing 1 megawatt solar facility also on the property located to the north of it, and then another solar facility located across the road as well. So there's a lot of solar located in this area. It's zoned agricultural and then also shoreland. So they're not proposing to put any of the electrical equipment or these solar panels in the shoreland section of the property. But they are proposing to put a water retention pond and a fence in the shoreline section. But because that's an accessory use to the what would be a permitted conditional use, it's allowable to have that retention pond and fence in the shoreline district. So they're proposing a 6-foot-high chain link fence, and they intend to plant native pollinator-friendly grasses. Or something similar. It's a low maintenance turf mix, and they have submitted a maintenance plan for keeping the property maintained. And that includes mowing the grass, making sure there's no damage to the panels, making sure that the fence is still working and the gate is still operating. So stormwater runoff is going to the retention pond. It's just going to naturally flow to it. They're not using any sort of piping or tiling. And the applicant's required by the state to get a stormwater pollution prevention plan and a national pollutant discharge elimination system permit. The Planning and Zoning Advisory Commission recommended approval. The conditions were typical. They did require a bond, that bond amount being the amount of decommissioning plus an inflation percentage per year, and no public comment was received.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Second.
A discussion.
Question, Madam Chair. This has nothing to do specifically with this. I would support it. But long-term, what happens to these solar panels when they stop working or become not unusable? There's been some fluttering talk out there in the crazy land, I guess is the best way to put it, that they would damage the environment. What can you tell us about that, Spencer?
Yeah, so I can mostly just talk about what I've spoken with the applicant and what they've submitted. So as part of their decommissioning plan, they've indicated they intend to recycle the solar panels, and they're saying the cost of recycling will equal the amount of salvage they'll get from recycling the panels. As far as environmental concerns, I'd have to do some research on that. I couldn't speak authoritatively without doing a little bit more research.
Would it be possible that somewhere down the road we could get a report as to what that is?
Absolutely.
If
yeah.
there's any truth to what's being rumored.
Yeah, we can look into that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Commissioner Morrow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure from what you just said about the salvage, And the cost of decommissioning, and yet there is a bond as well, correct?
There is a bond, yeah, and that bond covers 3.5% inflation per year is what the Planning Commission said. So, yes, but they are anticipating the cost of recovery to equal the salvage cost. But the county does, will require a bond to be in place with that condition if that's not the case or something else happens.
Madam Chair,
Yep.
Mr. Enter has a different solar farm, whatever. Has his, I don't know if behavior is the right word, but maintenance of that been acceptable? Okay, good. Pete was nodding.
Yes, and Pete could tell you about that better than I can.
No, I'll go with his nod, that's fine.
All right, thank you. Any additional questions? Hearing none, we'll call all those in favor.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next item?
Okay, so the second item we have is a registered land survey number 78. It's a request from Jeffrey Leonard, and he's requesting approval of that registered land survey. And it's really, this one's very simple. It doesn't create a split. It doesn't change the property lines. It's staff's understanding that a deed was recorded a while ago that created the current configuration of the lots. And it's a Torrens property, so this registered land survey is being recorded to correct that previous error.
Do we have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quick change of seats. Morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. The other item that Property Services has to bring forward is a resolution to adopt and implement the Hawk Creek One Watershed, One Plan Comprehensive Water Management Plan. This is the plan we discussed at the previous board workshop. Nicollet County has less than 5% of the watershed area for the Hawk Creek watershed, and our inclusion is required. As we're part of the watershed, and we've been able to make comments along the way for the overall plan. So, would you like me to read the resolution into the record, or?
Please.
So the resolution of Nicollet County, resolution to adopt and implement the Hawk Creek, Middle Minnesota Comprehensive Watershed Management Plan, One Watershed, One Plan. Excuse me. Whereas Nicollet County has been identified by the Board of Water and Soil Resources that the Hawk Creek, Middle Minnesota Comprehensive Water Management Plan, One Watershed, One Plan, was approved at its regular meeting held on January 26, 2022. And whereas partners must adopt and begin implementing the plan within 120 days of the date of the order in accordance with Minnesota Statute 103B, 101, Subdivision 14, and 103B, 801, and the One Watershed, One Plan operating procedures. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Nicollet County hereby adopts and will begin implementation of the approved Hawk Creek, Middle Minnesota Comprehensive Watershed Management Plan on One Watershed, One Plan for the area of the county identified within the plan.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to adopt the resolution?
I'll move.
Second.
Questions from the board?
Well, I guess just it's such a small percentage, and when I did go to the initial meeting, they really didn't want me there.
That's too bad. Their work.
Mandy was there too.
Their work upstream of us will benefit us in the long run.
Yes, absolutely.
Sarah, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Lipke?
Yes.
Commissioner Kohlers?
Yes.
Commissioner Drannell?
Yes.
Commissioner Morrow?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you.
Thanks, Spencer. Next on our agenda is Human Resources. Good morning, Christy.
Oops. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. The item I have for you today is in regards to Nicollet County's continuous improvement efforts. After review of the 2021 continuous improvement submissions, the facilities maintenance and public works departments were selected as having the most impactful improvement. The public works and facilities maintenance departments began having public works mechanic help with preventive maintenance of facilities maintenance trucks, plows, and skid loaders. This saves money on outside labor and cost of parts and leads to longer lasting equipment. It was a fantastic idea, and implementing it definitely improved efficiency and provided for cost savings. The collaborative work that they did on this front clearly reflects county values, especially leadership, efficiency, and accountability. It also demonstrates that they are dedicated to our mission to provide efficient services with innovation and accountability. Today, I ask the board to join me in congratulating all county staff on their 2021 continuous improvement efforts, and especially the Public Works and Facilities Maintenance Departments on their achievement.
Very cool. Thank you. Congratulations. Comments from the board? And we're going to document this with a photograph, I see?
There will be a photograph after the meeting.
Cool.
Perfect. Great.
Questions from the board? Comments?
Appreciate the efforts.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Nothing like cross-department.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Next on our agenda is admin.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. If I may take a few minutes just to expand on Ms. Larson's statements with it. We highlighted a pretty significant project by Facilities Maintenance and Public Works, but we know that all of our departments work very hard and also have some activities that we just want to briefly highlight. And a good reminder of what continuous improvement is, small change with it. We've been implementing continuous improvement at the county for about 7 to 8 years. And as you see, you may recall those projects when we first started were pretty significant size. We were really reevaluating a lot of our processes and how we went about working with our departments and with other clients and making those changes. And now what we're seeing are the projects are much smaller, but they still have significance with it. And so that's what I'm just going to briefly highlight from the other departments. Again, small change is significant with it. So you may see and hear me say these projects and not think that they're big, but in reality, they take minutes off of a process. So that means our clients and consumers get that process or service that much faster, or something is put in place, such as a skid loader, where snow can be removed from the parking lot with it. So I just want to take a few minutes just to highlight these projects by a couple of other departments. Brown Nicollet Environmental Health, and you'll notice that this theme is really related to what we've been dealing with the last 2 years with the pandemic and how we work with our consumers and clients and the importance of technology in our day-to-day services. So with Brown Nicollet, and this is just in the last couple of months, 4 months specifically, they've been able to take 2 years worth of documentation and go from paper to electronic. So that means now, rather than having file cabinet storage, they have that accessible wherever they are. So if there is a situation that they ever had to work remotely, they could access that paperwork. Again, that's an improvement both with service and efficiency for staff. The Sheriff's Department, they've looked at a lot of their processing of documents internally and how they obtain signatures. They've been able to reduce that time down by days of working with just a small change in their overall process and how they work with the chief deputy and the sheriff in obtaining signatures. Health and Human Services, they looked at one of their projects when it came to obtaining insurance or maintaining insurance when with child support cases. And they now have the opportunity to ensure that that child has access to the insurance when they need medical care, that they can get that insurance card and insurance information that much faster than they previously. It would take at times weeks to gather it because of the exchange with mail. Now they've been able to get it down to email with it, and so that child receives services, again, that much faster. The Attorney's Office and the Technologies Department, they work together to put the Adult Criminal Complaint Viewer link on the Attorney's Office website, and now rather than having someone to come in the office during our work hours, they can go ahead and obtain that information at any time and put in a request for with it. Again, so again, we're saving time for the consumer or clients, but then also that staff time that's being saved with it, and accessing 24 hours a day is something we know from the public it's important. And just have 2 more I just want to highlight. With finance, they continue to work on the UKG upgrades, those enhancements for essentially having the staff person go in and access what they need. Prime example is the W-2s, and so they are continuing to enhance the UKG and working with HR with that, so that's pretty significant when someone can go in and get their own information or change their mailing address rather than having us notifying HR, who then has to notify payroll, and we have this trickle-down effect. The staff person can go ahead and do it themselves and save the time. And lastly, just want to highlight community corrections. Previously, they had the ocular device. They've now transitioned into a testing line. And so what that means is it's more similar to like the jury call-in line, the way that it's been explained to me, rather than the probation officer calling in or arranging with an individual to come in and do the testing. They have it all set up, and there it's based on a color code system with it. So it's again, it's saving time of our probation officers and allowing them to do the hands-on work and having the system set up where they have the individuals call in, identify when they need to come in and test, and it's set up for them that way with it. So again, these are small changes, but they do have significance overall in the process, and very excited that we are continuing with our continuous improvement at the county level with it.
Cool.
It's exciting. It doesn't seem like these are pretty large projects, but they really are when we start looking at the staff time saved and the impact to the resident with it. So.
Madam Chair, I think it's an indication to everyone who lives in Nicollet County that folks who work here are continuously trying to improve the methods that they deliver their services. So we're grateful. Thank you.
As Ms. Larson stated, this is a representation of our county employees, of the dedication, the leadership, the efficiency, the innovation that they look at and how they approach their job. With that being said, I would like to go back to the agenda then and just have within your packet a letter of support requested by the City of Lafayette. They currently have a situation with their water treatment plant, and they are looking at upgrading it specifically to address some reverse osmosis system to implement that, but then also some other upgrades with it. And with a small town, any type of water treatment plant upgrade is significant. And so they are asking the county to sign a letter of support on behalf of the chair to move forward with applying for the congressionally directed spending request. And I do have a copy of that letter within your packet if you have any questions.
I'll happily move that.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
It's the salt in the wastewater, is that kind of the...
They didn't go down to that level of detail, but I know there's been over the years, there's been many issues with their treatment plant, and it's a very small city, and so any opportunity where they can look at funding, they do go forward with it.
I have sat in on a couple of their meetings already, and if they could get all the softeners out of town.
Yes, yeah.
That would probably take care of it, but people want good water, so they gotta give them good water.
Additional comments?
That's good.
Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mandy?
No, I do not have anything else.
Okay, thank you. Next on our agenda is County Attorney.
May I stay here?
Yeah.
Madam Chair, today I bring before the board a request that the board designate April 24th through 30th as Crime Victims' Rights Week. I have a proclamation that I would be prepared to read for the board, and then some general numbers to share with the board if that is acceptable to the chair.
Please.
Thank you. Proclamation. Whereas the term victim is more than just a label and has legal standing and protections that go along with it. Whereas state and federal Crime Victims' Rights Acts guaranteed victims the right to meaningfully participate in the criminal justice process. Whereas victim service providers, advocates, law enforcement officers, attorneys, and other allied professionals can help survivors find their justice by enforcing these rights. Whereas victim service providers and allied professionals can reach more victims through innovative trauma-informed programs such as telehealth services and multidisciplinary teams. Whereas victim service providers and allied professionals can increase access to victim services and compensation in areas that have been historically underserved, marginalized, and adversely affected by inequality by implementing culturally responsive services. Whereas equity and inclusion are fundamental prerequisites to survivor care, and survivor-led services that provide victims with opportunities to share their experiences are essential blueprints for support. Whereas National Crime Victims' Rights Week provides an opportunity to recommit to ensuring that accessible, appropriate, and trauma-informed services are offered to all victims of crime. And whereas Nicollet County is hereby dedicated to helping crime victim survivors find their justice by enforcing victims' rights, expanding access to service, and ensuring equity and inclusion for all. Now therefore, I, as chairperson of the Board of Commissioners of Nicollet County, do hereby proclaim the week of April 24th through 30th, 2022 as Crime Victims' Rights Week, and affirm this county's commitment to creating a victim service and criminal justice response that assists all victims of crime during Crime Victims' Rights Week and throughout the year, and expressing our sincere gratitude and appreciation for those community members, victim service providers, and criminal justice professionals who are committed to improving our response to all victims of crime so they may find relevant assistance, support, justice, and peace. Signed by Marie Drendel, Chair, Nicollet County Board of Commissioners.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to accept the proclamation?
So moved.
Second.
Comments?
I'm just glad that, we are looking out for the crime victims, because sometimes they get lost in the courts.
They do. The system is really geared toward the process from a defendant's perspective, and ensuring that victims are heard throughout the process is equally important.
Thank you.
Additional comments? Michelle?
Do you want to vote and then I can provide some additional numbers, or?
Sure. Please call the roll, Sarah.
Commissioner Morrow,
Yes.
Commissioner Lipke,
Yes.
Commissioner Kohlers,
Yes.
Commissioner Drannell.
Yes. Facts and figures.
Thank you. Madam Chair, as the board is aware, Bonnie Peterson is our Victim Services Coordinator, and she would be here today, but she has court today that she attends. Her position is funded by a grant, and one of the positives and negatives of having grant funding is that we have all kinds of statistics and numbers that we can gather for that role. Ms. Peterson, when I was talking about appearing today and reading the proclamation, she noted that previously she would have contact with 200 victims per quarter, new victims and existing victims from prior quarters. She's now noting that she's reaching 230. And I'm asking what's the purpose of, or what's the reasoning for the increase. We're seeing more cases with identifiable victims, and our outreach efforts as we continue to improve and refine how we're reaching out to victims, and whether we're doing that by mail and email, has promoted an increased participation of individuals in the criminal justice process that are identified as victims. So they're reaching out more for more information about the process. So the total number of new victims served by Ms. Peterson in 2021 was 424. Over the course of 2021, there were 2,050 different notifications provided to victims, different hearings, different rights, etc. She sent out affidavits of restitution that allowed victims to hopefully get some type of financial compensation for their out-of-pocket expenses to 309 different victims. Significantly as well, she provided referrals to other services and resources for victims in 175 different instances. So we really see an impact for those that Ms. Peterson is reaching out throughout the criminal justice process to those identified as victims and survivors of crime. In addition, we're also doing we're trying to get back into doing significant community outreach with our fraud prevention and awareness community service. We are out in a number of different events. I believe it's in April or May, we're going to be at the Senior Expo with fraud prevention materials. I'll have the Lions Eyeglass reclamation there as well. The sheriff will be there with the drug take back as well. And finally, during Crime Victims' Rights Week, Ms. Peterson will have a table set up at locations to provide information about victims' rights. So I'm very proud of the work that Ms. Peterson has been doing since she's taken on this role and expanded that role. And expanded her knowledge and base of information to provide services to victims. and I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Michelle, thank you for that report. Can you give us any specifics of how people that we are reaching out to are reacting to that outreach, and what they're saying in terms of the efforts being made to help them?
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't have the comments right in front of me. We do surveys after the case is completed, asking individuals that have participated through that process to provide feedback. I think the two comments that frequently come back on those surveys are that Ms. Peterson is very compassionate and providing information, very calm and understanding and supportive. The other piece is that, but for the communication and outreach of Ms. Peterson, individuals wouldn't have understood what was happening in the process, and are very grateful for that reach out and just being aware. Oftentimes, individuals choose not to come to the court proceedings. Sometimes they can happen many times, and they can be very short hearings. Ms. Peterson attends those hearings and then provides that feedback to those individuals, so it keeps them informed with recognizing the demands on everyone's time, because they don't ask to become involved and have another demand on their time to know what's happening on the criminal case, and Ms. Peterson provides them with that information.
So I guess I'm hearing that the outreach by the county is generally accepted by those folks who are victims.
Correct. We give them that power to decide how much do they want to be involved. Some individuals never respond to our outreach. They don't, for whatever reason, they choose not to be involved. Others might only be wanting that written communication, and others may want phone calls. And so we give them that power where they didn't, again, choose to come into the system. We give them that power to choose how they want to be involved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't want to cut you off. I'm sorry. I just want to follow up on Commissioner Kolar's, if I might. Thank you, Madam Chair. Even I'm a licensed attorney, but our family's experience with your office and the victims, that was very important. So the fact that someone may not understand the process to me is not at all surprising, right, if you're not intimately familiar with it. I did have a follow-up question, though, if I might. I was talking with someone from one of our cities about language issues they find in trying to support victims. Could you just tell us a little bit about how you were talking about communicating with victims, and I imagine there are at times language barriers.
There are. We utilize the language line as much as we can. If we know that there's going to be a barrier, we try to ensure that we have that in place. If there's a cold call, for example, we have those services available. Ms. Peterson is constantly trying to reach out and find translated documents. We've utilized Gustavus to help translate some of our documents so that we have them available to provide them in alternate language sources. I know we're going to reach out for the telephone, I don't remember what it's called, to have that available in our office so that we have that easy translation available as well. It's a challenge, but Ms. Peterson is certainly identifying ways to address that challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is the county attorney update.
I think I provided the most important update so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, Chair's report. I have nothing at this time. Commissioner committee reports. Commissioner Lepke.
Well, I went to that Highway 14 meeting in Cortland. I think that was about the date of our last regular meeting. Went to the Rural Minnesota Energy Board in Slayton. Went to the Brown County REA meeting as a customer. Went to the Benco Electric meeting as a commissioner. Went to a ditch meeting in Gaylord. We had a Hark and Store meeting with the Minnesota Historical Society and Brown and Nicollet County Historical Societies, the New Ulm Chamber of Commerce. Went to the Regional Soil and Water meeting last week, which is in New Ulm, which is very handy. And a ditch meeting in Olivia, which was not all that handy.
Commissioner Merrill.
Sarah, I have this all written down. I'll just hand you a piece of paper. Recycling, the Brown Nicollet Health Executive Board. We had an insurance meeting. Attended the open house for redistricting here. A broadband meeting. attended a meeting regarding ditch 86A, Madam Chair, and I'm going to take just one moment, if I might, to say that this situation on 86A has, for some time now, been remarkably frustrating, and certainly for the landowners, and I just hope landowners know that we're doing everything we can. Sometimes we can't always say what we're doing because of restrictions, but I just want to assure folks that they are being heard, and we are trying everything we can to get this situation resolved. And I want to thank Nate Henry for all he's trying to do as well to get this ditch situation done. Attended yesterday a meeting concerning compassionate communities. And then finally, the 169-99 interchange meeting last night by MnDOT, which was very informative. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kolars?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had union negotiations in late March. I too was here with Commissioner Morrow and Commissioner Drantle and the redistricting meeting, county compensation study yesterday that Christy and Andy Landcamer led. And just wanted to say thanks to Sarah for the newsletter. Several folks have come up to us as county commissioners to say that this is a tremendous document that is very helpful. It comes out twice a year, correct? Or twice. And I received a note or call from Joe Lawrence from Miles Lawrence Construction, who lives between Mankato and St. Peter, who said that, and he knows what highways look like when they're done well, and gave great praise to Highway 13, or County Road 13, and work that Seth's office did. And also former Representative Clark Johnson saw him over the weekend, and this clubhouse deal, he said, was terrific for the county, and praised the county board for the work that they're bringing forward in that area. So thank you, Sarah. Continued good publishing.
It's fantastic, Sarah.
It is.
It really is very, very good.
Marie, can I add one comment?
Sure.
When I drove to Olivia, I took County Road 21 past Fort Ridgely, and it's a nice road. Our staff keeps it really good. I got to Renville County, and it, I don't know, it was bad. It was all potholes and chunks and pieces of tar gone. And I did chide the Renville County Commissioners about that a little bit, and they said, "You went on that road? We don't even drive on that road." So
Crazy.
thank you for the staff for keeping it in good shape.
Great. Thank you all. Next on our agenda is to approve per diems and expenses.
Move it.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
And I totally skipped over commissioner meetings and conferences. Do we have any?
I don't think so.
Nothing at this time.
Okay, great. We can adjourn the regular board meeting and come back for the Drainage Authority at 9:55.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, we can call the April 12th, 2022 Drainage Authority meeting to order. We start with the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? Hearing none, can we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. First on the agenda is the consent agenda.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Next is the continued public hearing for County Ditch 48A repair project. So, Jackie?
Yes, so, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. So today is a continuation of the public hearing that was on March 22nd. At that meeting, well, let me back up a bit. This is a public hearing for County Ditch 48A. And I'll give you a little history and background on this. So on July 13th, 2020, the Nicollet County Board of Commissioners ordered the reestablishment of the public drainage system, the records to indicate for County Ditch 48A to bring them up to date. During the process of the reestablishment, a field survey and inspection of the channel demonstrated that the effectiveness of the outlet for our agricultural drainage had diminished from its as construction and subsequently improved condition. and it needs maintenance work. Portions of the open ditch are partially filled with sediment, and downstream culvert is heavied and likely restricting flow. And the water elevations in the ditch are above the downstream outlet elevation. So as the Nicollet County Drainage Authority, in your role, they have contracted with Houston Engineering to prepare a repair report on possibilities of how to bring this back to the originally constructed way here. And we did have a meeting, the public hearing on March 22nd. There was some additional information the board would have liked to heard and more landowner input. So it was recessed until today to get some more landowner input on this repair. We also have Chris Otterness here from Houston Engineering, which I will have him do his repair report again to refresh the memory of what happened at the last meeting and for the additional landowners that are here today. And then after his report, we can open it up for public comment. And then the Drainage Authority would be asked to act on this, on how the landowners would like to proceed with this. So we will go on from there at the end. But right now we'll have Chris Otterness go through his detailed report on the repair.
Sure. Again, I am Chris Otterness with Houston Engineering, and for those of you who were here last time around, a lot of this will be a repeat, but I'll try to move through this fairly quickly here. Again, we were hired to complete a repair report following the reestablishment of record on the drainage system. And basically, we look at a few different things with that repair report. We identify what portions of the drainage system are in need of repair, look at potential solutions to getting the repair completed. And in this case, there's actually a couple of unique solutions to that can be potentially proceeded forward with. We look at construction costs for these, and we say the term probable construction costs because, again, anytime that you're estimating cost, they can be higher or lower depending on what's going on at the time with the construction market and that sort of thing. And I'll talk a bit about that more in a bit. And then I'll go over the decision points that the board has with this. Next slide. So again, I talked a little bit about these repair tasks. We looked at actually a couple different alternatives for the repair. We also looked at a culvert sizing, and this is the culvert that's in between Mud and Duck Lakes, located on DNR property. And then we provide a recommendation for repair that will, again, attempt to restore the function of the ditch. And it's important to note what the restored function is, and that it's not necessarily a dry ditch, because in this particular case that's not feasible with the structure that is located downstream of Middle Lake that affects water elevations in the ditch. Next slide. And this slide talks specifically on that it's shown on the graphic that's on the screen there in the lower left-hand corner of that graphic. It's a fixed crest weir. The elevation of the weir is shown in our construction plans that we have included with our repair report. Indicates the elevation of the that weir in relation to the bottom of the originally constructed ditch. And like I said, it is a couple feet above that original channel bottom at the very downstream end. So no matter what is done on this drainage system, there is going to be water standing in the ditch during the entire year. It just is a matter of how much water there is and how much it can stack up as you go further upstream. Some of the unique challenges with this system, and not completely unique to all systems, but most of them do not have this kind of scenario where you have that constraint on the outlet. It also runs through two different public waters, again, where it outlets into Middle Lake and then going through Duck Lake. And with the fact that these go through public waters, there is regulatory engagement with the DNR required anytime a repair is done in this particular area of the drainage system. Because of how, if you can stay on that slide a little bit more here, because of that unique situation of how wet it is, it's going to be challenging to get a traditional excavator in this area and have the excavator be able to safely traverse along the edge of the ditch because of how wet it is and how unstable the soils are. So it's more likely that some sort of an amphibious solution is required, essentially something that is has floats on it. And I'll talk about two different options here now that provide that amphibious feature here. Just a quick remark regarding that as constructed and subsequently improved condition that was determined during the reestablishment of records. It does set the lowest available grade that the Drainage Authority can repair to in order for it to be considered to be a repair and not an improvement. And sorry, apologize having to go back. That purple line that we have shown on that graphic there, that is that permanent pool that is set by the elevation of that weir that's downstream of Middle Lake. And so you can again see that that is above that original channel bottom. Next slide. So on our recommended repair, we identified a couple of different segments of ditch that need to be repaired in order to restore the function of the drainage system. The most obvious one that I've talked about now is that area between Middle and Duck Lakes. There's anywhere up to 2.5 feet of material in that area that needs to be removed. There's also a culvert there that I mentioned that is between Middle and Duck Lakes, and that also needs to be replaced and lowered. Right now it's over 3 feet above that original channel bottom. And so that itself is part of what is blocking the flow there. But even if that does get lowered with that muck and sediment that's in the ditch bottom, that creates a challenge for water to get through there, and it also encourages weed growth, particularly cattails that can clog the flow of water in the channel. So we would be looking to complete that work. There's also some repair that is needed along Fort Road. That's shown in the middle of that graphic there. That also needs to be repaired. That can be done through traditional excavation as it's not as wet in that area along the road. However, the effects of that repair on there are going to be limited until that outlet from Duck into Middle Lakes is fixed. And there are a couple of areas that with some small sloughing a little further upstream that can be repaired also, but they aren't nearly as important as what's occurring downstream. Yeah, next slide. So the effect of doing these repairs will be that the sediment and vegetation removal will allow water to flow better. It's definitely not going to be perfect or ideal given that outlet condition at the end of Middle Lake, but it at least allows the ability for water to flow, whereas now with all that vegetation, it really is holding that back. It's like having essentially water trying to go through a fine mesh to try to get through there. It slows the water down. The survey that we completed along the Fort Road excuse me, says that the repair could lower water elevations up by the road by as much as a foot. That's what we determined to be the difference in elevation between the water up by Fort Road and the water that is over in Middle Lake when we completed our survey. And that again is at a time where there wasn't a lot of rainfall that was occurring. It could make even potentially a bigger difference following a substantial rainfall. And then the other thing that's important to note is the ditch does go all the way down into Middle Lake. There are floating bogs that are there, and those floating bogs, if those can be removed and managed in the future, that may decrease some of that stacking of the water that I'm indicating is occurring during or following these rainfall events. and so that can provide a more predictable water elevation working its way upstream. So I'll talk about these two different options that we have for amphibious excavation along this area between Duck and Middle Lakes. What's shown on the screen here is a floating excavator. That was actually taken from a project we worked on with another drainage authority in the North Metro area. It essentially is kind of a standard excavator that is mounted on these big pontoon tracks that allow it to be able to bridge those unsteady soils and even float to some degree in an area that is nearly open water. And then they also do have a long reach arm mounted on that excavator to allow the excavator to work from the bank or a little further off the bank and be able to reach down into the ditch. This particular piece of equipment was from a company that is located in Nicollet, Wisconsin. They had a fairly long distance they had to mobilize their equipment there, so mobilization of equipment is a fairly substantial cost in completing this amphibious excavation with this kind of piece of equipment. There aren't a lot of contractors that have that type of equipment around, so in order to provide an economy of scale on doing this work, it may be worthwhile for the Drainage Authority also to consider if there are other locations that it manages, or maybe even consult with some of the other adjoining drainage authorities, other counties adjacent Nicollet County, to talk about if there's an ability to get that piece of equipment like that mobilized for multiple projects, and that could potentially cut the cost of the work down. Next slide. The other option that we've looked at is this machine that's referred to as a cookie cutter. Essentially, it has almost like a propeller blade you can see on the right-hand photo that is mounted and spins vertically, that chops up the matter that is in the channel and essentially sprays it out to each bank. There's also the ability with that cookie cutter machine to have a grapple that will grab onto any of that material that is chopped up and pull it off to the side, and actually even be able to pull some of the bog mat material over that is broken loose and get that out of the way. It's a machine that is very ideally suited toward breaking up bog material. It is completely amphibious, floats on a, for lack of a better term, a boat, and it will float in the channel. Those propeller arms, they actually propel the machine forward, and that's how it moves forward to break up the bog material. One disadvantage about a machine like that is that it only can work its way down to a certain depth, and that depth is based on what the water elevation is in whatever body of water it is working in at that time. It can only go down, say, maybe a couple feet below the water line to chop that material up. So you might not be able to remove all of that sediment that is down in the channel working its way back up toward Duck Lake, but it at a very minimum can get the majority of that root mass in the cattails and be able to allow other management practices to occur in the future, including doing spraying. Next slide. So we prepared a couple of cost estimates for this work, and these are actually both from estimates provided last fall by contractors that do this type of work. We estimated the requirement for the floating excavator to be approximately $107,000, and that included both the excavation along the ditch bottom and also the lowering or replacing of the culvert. Actually, both of these estimates that we have provide that those two costs here. The next slide. So the other slide, or other cost estimate we got was for a cookie cutter machine. That we estimated about $135,000, and again, had the same kind of scope to it. They're clean out of the channel, the removal and lowering of that culvert. Sorry, my phone was buzzing unrelentingly at me there. I needed to shut it down there. Sorry. The costs that we had in here for that cookie cutter machine also included a harvester. That was that grapple hook that I was mentioning that can grab a hold of that floating material and move it off there. The contractor that gave that estimate to me indicated that if that harvester wasn't used and the vegetation material was not collected, that could potentially reduce that cost upwards of $28,000. So again, one thing I'll note about these cost estimates that we provided here for both those two options is that they were based on cost that the contractor provided at the time. The cost of doing any type of construction, and even maybe more so some of this work that we do related to drainage systems and in water, they're highly volatile right now. We've recently had a project, it was a dredging project that came in nearly double what the engineer's estimate was due to this volatility and the lack of available contractors to do some of this kind of work. So it's one of those things that we really won't know the actual cost until we bid the work out or get quotes back for that work. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about those costs and noting, we do have those two options. The advantages of that amphibious excavator are that it can go all the way to the bottom of that profile. It might not be able to go quite as far into Mud Lake and might not be able to pull some of that bog material in the very farthest part of going into Mud Lake where the ditch outlets. This cookie cutter machine can take care of all of that bog material all the way up to the culvert and then up to Duck Lake, but it can't get into as nearly as great of a depth. So I would say ideally it would probably be the best option if we can get that amphibious excavator to dig all the way down and dig that open channel out. But in either one of these methods, we're going to be somewhat at the mercy of what the contractor availability is, what the cost end up coming back for these options. And for that reason, I would provide a recommendation that the Drainage Authority keep their options open to utilizing either method for this work. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about these items related to the construction cost that we utilized actual contractor cost. It's important to note that the benefiting landowners are the ones that will be incurring this cost, but they incur the actual cost of what's done and not necessarily what we're estimating here at this time. And I talked a little bit about some of these things that may cause fluctuations in those costs. And again, there's probably an advantage if we do embark on one option or other of trying to see if the contractor can work multiple projects in multiple areas in this area to reduce that cost of mobilizing the equipment down here. Next slide. So if the project is ordered, it's something that won't be able to occur immediately. There's going to be a few steps in place. And we are at the hearing right now, and if the board does order that repair, probably the earliest that we could advertise for bids or for quotes for this work would be sometime during the following summer here. There, again, is going to need to be some regulatory coordination with the DNR in order to be able to not only get some sort of regulatory approval from them in the way of permission or a permit, but also look to the future with the DNR and how some of this might be managed potentially through herbicide treatment that could occur along the way. And then ideally, if those quotes come back during the summer, and if we can get some reasonable quotes for construction there, probably the earliest that this could be completed would be this fall. And actually, that would be a good time to complete this work, because during the fall, it's probably the time of year where you have the lowest water levels, and that could take advantage in either option of having those lower water levels for either stability of the equipment or be able to get the equipment down a little bit lower into the channel. Next slide. So some of the considerations for the Drainage Authority in relation to any repair would be is whether or not the drainage system is in need of repair. Are these repairs necessary to restore the function and benefit to the landowners? And given the limitations that we do have in this particular drainage systems, can those repairs actually achieve the outcomes that are desired by the landowners? And I would say for the first two bullet points, it's our recommendation that the work is necessary to be completed. But the third bullet is a little more of a challenge, because some of that depends on what the landowner benefit actually is and what they feel like is worth their while in order to complete the repair. Next slide. And with that, I can answer any questions from the board right away, and then if you want to open to public comment after that, I can certainly answer questions then also.
All right, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Chris?
I do.
Jack?
Chris, thank you for being here today. Couple of questions. What is the depth on the south side of, what's the elevation of the lake on the south side of Duck compared to the north side of Middle? What's the difference there? And then how far is that, how long is that bog? Is it 100 yards? I don't have a sense of it.
Sure, and if you bear with me just a minute, I'm going to see if I can pull that elevation up. I know we have it in our report here. So right now that elevation of the weir is at a 975.3, and the outlet that we have at Middle Lake is at a 971.58. So there's actually at that particular location almost 4 feet of depth there from the very bottom of the channel. That's again right where it is at the very outlet into the open water portion of Middle Lake. If you compare that elevation of the weir that is at Middle Lake and compare that to the elevation of the culvert that is between Middle and Duck Lakes, the weir is a little over half a foot above that culvert elevation. So at a very minimum, lowering that culvert and being able to clean out some of that channel will make an immediate difference flowing through between Duck and Middle Lakes. And we did note that the water elevation in our previous survey again was another foot or so above that downstream weir elevation when you looked at Duck Lake and further upstream by Fort Road. And then your other question regarding the bog material. So if you go from the culvert between Duck and Middle Lakes and go out to the open water portion of Middle Lake, it's approximately 1,400 feet in length. I would consider most of that to be semi-boggy material, and it's going to be a combination of cattails, and then as you get maybe a little further out there, about halfway out to the open water, it's more of that kind of floating bog mat type thing that's out there.
And then, Madam Chair, if I could, how long estimating would it take to clean 1,400 feet of this bog?
I would say that it probably would take maybe a couple days with an excavator at the very most. I'm not sure exactly how long the cookie cutter would take, but I would guess it'd probably be a similar length of time. Again, the biggest issue with this is not so much the time that they're out there, it's more of the time to get the equipment there to site. They're going to spend almost as much time driving back and forth from where their equipment is to Nicollet County as they will actually doing the work in the channel itself.
And then the final, how long would that stay clean?
That's going to depend on several different things. You know, if the county works with the DNR to complete some herbicide treatment along there, you could potentially keep that open as long as you're doing that herbicide treatment. And you know, eventually there might be some sloughing that might occur in there that you know, may decrease the depth of the channel a little bit, but it's probably going to stay open for quite a while. If the herbicide treatment doesn't occur following this, then it's going to be something that's a lot harder to predict. You know, it could depend even on how much wind you get or flow you get in any given year. The more flow you have, the more it's going to stay open. If you get wind in the lake, you could potentially have that bog material push back in if it's coming in the wrong direction and seal the channel off, and we've seen that happen before. So we're a little more at the mercy of Mother Nature at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions, Commissioner Morrow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow up on one of Commissioner Kollar's questions. It's about the deployment cost and the floating excavators, what I'm focusing on. Can you just say a little bit more about how either rare these are? I know you talked about the one coming from Wisconsin. Are they not more local than that?
Yeah, we haven't found many pieces. In fact, I don't know if we found any pieces of equipment just like that in Minnesota. They're a lot more common in the southern part of the U.S. There's a lot of them down in Louisiana, down in some of those states, you know, in the Bayou territory, you know. But up here, they just aren't as common. People aren't doing that kind of work as frequently, and so it would be worthwhile to do some, make some contacts with some companies that do dredging work routinely to see if they might be mobilizing a piece of equipment anytime soon from Louisiana, because you know, sometimes contractors, especially the bigger ones, will do that in order to get a specific project done. They'll mobilize that equipment from in the southern U.S., but they won't necessarily keep it on hand because there isn't the demand to regularly do that kind of work.
Interesting. Great. All right. Hearing no more questions from the board, we can open it up for public comment at this time. So if you have a public comment, please come up to the microphone and state your name for the record.
Chris, you can stay there.
Oh, sure.
Hello, my name is Gene Dorn. I'm one of the landowners around this, and I'm glad to see everything that's happening because this took quite a while. And I apologize to the board, Jackie, everybody else that we were not here last meeting. And thank you very much for doing the extending on this because it is a very important thing. I've been working on this thing for well over 10, 15 years. I guess probably the first thing I'm thinking is on that culvert. I've been out there since, well, originally last time that ditch was dug was in approximately 67. And that time we used to do a fair amount of trapping through there and everything. And then that culvert that's in there, that's a good sized culvert, which I think it needs if we get heavy rain. But at the same time, the top of that culvert, when it is buried at the right amount or the right depth, in a matter of, and each year is different, but 5, 6, probably 7 years, the frost keeps heaving it. And it used to be, there was a local guy, Bob Weber, when he'd go across, he had like a 3-bottom plow. When it would catch on that, then he'd get it out and it'd have to be lowered. That's one thing about a culvert sitting there, because the top, there isn't enough cover on it. Now, I don't know if in time, because when I talked to DNR, I was over in New Ulm a couple times, and then Nicolette, they first thought about putting some type of a bridge in, or I'm just wondering if we could mound a little more dirt over it to keep it a little more stable over time. And you're talking about the sediment, you know, that whole works is in a peat base things, and there is going to be a fair amount of sediment coming into that. And you know, sometimes I don't care how deep you do it, it's not going to affect the flow because water has its level, but it will lengthen the time that sediment will approximately build up into the bottom of that and come up to start to affect it. just one thing that I'm thinking about that. Downstream in the middle or the lake rushes, yes, that's a big concern, especially with the floating bogs that are coming through and the wind can move back and forth. We had a fella here last year that actually went out with a cookie cutter, and because we have another problem that exists from there when it goes into the northern part of Middle Lake. Without having the muskrats around, the rushes have grown in so deeply that it takes a long time to get that through. Plus the rushes are holding up some sediment, a number of things. Now when he did that with a cookie cutter, I did keep track of it. It took approximately, well, in a matter of 12 days, I seen up on our end a drop of probably an inch and a half. And within 30 days, we did have a drop of close to 9 inches just by moving that water through. But the only thing that I have a problem with cookie cutters is, yes, they do a good job for a period of time, but rushes has such a fast grow back. And if you don't spray something, and when I talk to DNR, there are chemicals, Ranger or something else that is approved for water aquatic spraying. And so that'd be very important on that. Chris, is it back in 86 or 87, we went out there and we got approval from DNR at that time. We did some dynamiting through those rush areas and some of the floating bogs. Now, this, when you come to the end of this where it goes into Duck Lake, it's very true. It doesn't come up fast. It doesn't. There's a long ways for that sediment there and the floating bog. Is that something that can be done today? To dynamite something like that and blow it out, and especially if we keep it sprayed once or twice a year to help control that, because that actually worked quite well at that time.
Sure, Madam President, I haven't heard of people doing that recently, and I mean, I suppose it could be. We can make an inquiry to the DNR about that, but I think that it's probably unlikely that they would allow that.
And I understand, now we don't have a lot of good fish there. Yes, we do have carp, we do have bullheads, we do have a few other things, but yeah, that'd be one thing that DNR, at that time, they give us right to do it. And we just dropped down to pushed down into the soft soil and kept going along, and once you started one end, it was just like a string. She exploded, and it was unbelievable how that worked. How about something like they did over at Lake Hanska years ago, and probably you don't recall that. They did a huge project on dredging, where you put the dredge out there, which is basically a floating, sucking up, doing things. I was amazed what they did with rushes and everything there, and then that hose goes out wherever you put it, where it builds up. I don't know if that can get down low enough, but they did remove a lot of stuff. In fact, they actually put it up on some farm fields at that time. But these are just some questions that I have. I do really feel, and this is another thing, that when I talked to DNR and they sold that cookie cutter because they said it was too expensive to keep up. But now last year when I was there, he said, well, we probably have to do something. The duck hunters are really complaining. Well, the farmers have been complaining for a while, but I don't know if they'll get one back, because that is very true. You know, everything is fine until we get the heavy rain, and they will happen in time. We can't get rid of the water fast enough. And when they put that additional dike down back a number of years ago, they raised that dike 2/10, which is approximately 2.5 inches, but you take over that whole body of water. That's a lot of gallons that they did for that. And to me, it seems like that wasn't quite fair. I don't think that was advertised enough. All the farmers that had tiled into there and everything else, it was like that should be grandfathered in. Now you changed our water level quite a bit. But that's a different thing. But I do feel that either with DNR or something that we do have to do, because we have some pretty choke up areas. If you follow down with a drone or whatever that you can, or satellite, you can see it's pretty closed in on sediment, not sediment, rushes and bogs. But Oh, another thing is, Chris, now that all depends on winter and how much snow we get, but once it freezes and things, is it feasible to do when it freezes up, and that depends on weather and things, of setting these big, what do you call them, those wooden things that you hold on, and we've got a lot more stabilization in the area, yeah, mats on it, and to move down on that. But I know that's a weather issue, because if we get a lot of snow, it's going to insulate that.
Sure, yeah, and I've worked with a lot of contractors that use those mats in the wet areas. Oftentimes they like to do that in late summer and in fall, because they can get the vegetation itself to help bridge the material underneath each one of the mats. But there are some of those areas where they really can't get into, even with mats, too far. I think that, in this project, it's possible they could do the, and even likely they could do the area immediately on either side of the culvert between Duck and Middle Lakes with excavator on mats, but they wouldn't be able to get very far out to Middle Lake with that.
No, the problem is the ditch filled up so much, and now she floods around, and she's so soft all the way around this, because the water couldn't get out there. I mean, we've even got a few willow trees and a few things like that have come in there too. And, okay. I guess that's all that I have on it, but yes, I very much appreciate you extending this for us. We didn't have enough people here, and so I'm glad to hear that this is going on. Thank you. Any questions?
I think we'll hear from everybody.
Yeah, we'll hear from everybody and have more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Next, anyone else that wish to comment? Normally we limit you to 3 minutes, but I forgot to remind Jean of that. So, any other comments? Or anybody else like to comment at this time?
Jerry Payne, landowner. You think we're going to have to get the DNR hydrologist involved in this before we go on any further?
Certainly before going out for quotes on this, we would want to get the DNR hydrologist involved to begin that regulatory process to make sure that we can get that completed ahead of doing that, the quote work. But I typically don't want to get too far into the regulatory process until a decision is made whether to move forward, because it can take some time and effort to work through that process with the DNR.
I know it used to be right here, but in Nicollet County, and then he moved, or he retired. I think they're out of Hutchinson now, right?
Yeah, I believe the area hydro that we'd be working with would be out of Hutchinson.
Gary Bennett.
Yeah.
That's all for right now, because I think we're going to have that, plus ahead of time get that herbicide lined up, because it's going to come right back in. Thank you.
Were there, Mr. Payne, was there photographs you wanted to talk about?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yes. I just took pictures with my phone and looked a couple of days after our last meeting, and I looked north and south, and you can't tell much difference other than if you look way on the horizon on one of these, you can see a building site. But there's the culvert. I was standing right on it, and there was still some ice and snow out there when I was out there. But yeah, that is high, that culvert. I can't believe how much that's worked up out of there. Yeah, you'd have a hard time going across there now with a plow. But yeah, you can see the ice. But that's both directions. That's what I was worried about. How wide are they going to make it if they go cutting through there, and what depth? And he's answered that. So it's going to be a project. You can see how it's closed in down the way there. But that's the way it looks out there. I just wanted to, if anybody else had been out there to look at that. I walked out there because we're just east of there is we have a farm right up against Duck Lake. So and then all along the north shore of Middle Lake. And water is coming in on the north shore of Middle Lake. It's getting high already right now. I don't know now that all the ice going out, and if it'll open up, go away here pretty soon. I don't know, but it's building up. We don't need any deeper out there.
Madam President and Board, so just to kind of note regarding these photos, you can see the staining on the photo. You know that I think generally it would be where a lot of the soil material would have been on before, and that's an indication, as Mr. Dorn indicated, that the culvert is heaved up over time. And related to what he was, wondering about what could be done. One of the most important things on any culvert, particularly when you're in areas that are unsteady soil, is getting as much material dug out where you're placing the culvert, so that you're placing on a base of sand and gravel to get a proper bedding of the culvert. That will help. As he also indicated, having enough material over top of it to help hold it in place will be important there too, and kind of essentially keep it weighted down. You don't have to worry about necessarily a metal culvert floating like you would a plastic pipe, but the heavier you can have material over it, that'll help some of that frost heaving that can occur as well.
All right.
May I ask one question, just following
Sure.
up on that? Thank you, Mr. Arnold. So in this case, for example, you mentioned how we can see where the soil had been at one point. In addition to putting more on top initially, would maintaining that soil cover as well be helpful as well?
Absolutely. Maintaining that cover on there, and part of that is the responsibility of DNR to be able to do that. But working with the Drainage Authority, it can be checked and verified if that's becoming a problem out there. And as well, I think a good discussion with the DNR will be to talk about what they need in length for their purposes out there, and not putting the culvert in at a length any greater than what is needed. So the longer you make it, the more likely it is to start popping up.
Madam Chair, last question. Do you have any idea, was this a natural stream once upon a time, pre-settlement?
I think it's highly likely that it was in some way, shape, or form. Yeah.
So who would be responsible for the culvert replacement?
Well, the responsibility lies on the DNR for the culvert because they're the landowner. Regardless of whether it is a public ditch or a water course, because they're the landowner, they're responsible for the culvert.
If I may speak again, that culvert was put in by Martin Fawney, and originally this was ditch 48, and then when County Road 5 was straightened out and done, that's when they changed it, and it was 48A. And being that farmer put that in, and at that time when that happened, I can remember 3 times since I've been out there that I moved out there in 1980, that it was lowered 3 times up until approximately 10 years ago. But the reason that was put in by a private owner, when DNR bought that, they own that on that, and that was a thing that they didn't know at the time. And back in the 80s when it got so dry, then I don't know if it was the county or who, but from that culvert going north, then they took a cat in there and pushed out through the cattail and sediment over to where it comes in to the ditch, and they did lower that somewhat. But again, that was done in the 80s, 88, I believe, when it was that dry fall, because that lake was completely dried up that year. And there was something else, but now I forgot. But yeah, that will push up, because I know in a matter of close to 30 years that was lowered, it's dug down 2, if not 3 times. And do you happen to have my old, because my son and I, the last time when we was here a year ago, we flew a drone and we took a lot of pictures of that. Mandy, is that, we don't have that on record. I give you a plug-in or a, what do you call them? And we showed it at that time.
We
Other-
can look, and it may not be, excuse me, on this laptop, but we can see if we have it on the
Okay,
files.
because of that drone, it really shows how it's growed in and all the way down, how it is. And also you can see on which side they put the dirt. Now, that was the thing when I was over DNR, what are you gonna do with that dirt? And I said, well, originally it was there, because you can see it in the way it was. For a while, they was telling me you gotta remove that. I don't know on a situation like that, so. Because we used to walk along there and deer hunt, and that was always built up high on that. But over time, that settled out. You can't hardly tell that anything is there like that, so.
Yeah, and generally what we've, the argument we've made for the DNR in these kind of cases is that where you have these channels downstream of a lake, the sediment that's in the channel isn't coming from upstream. It's really the sloughing off of material from the bank. So we're just simply putting that material back where it came from. And that's typically a very successful argument to make to the DNR to put it there and not have to haul it off. Because practically speaking, it would be virtually impossible to remove that material off-site.
Yeah, and when we did on the drone, then we got different pictures, and you can actually see that which side was higher, how it sort of looked, but it's pretty well flat now. Now you can see from there, because that's actually looking south. Right, Jerry?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's looking south, so. All right, thanks again.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any input for the public hearing before I close the public hearing? Any other comments from the public? Hearing none, we'll close the public testimony portion of the public hearing. And bring it back to the board for discussion. So our challenge here, I'm going to change glasses, is to decide whether to act or not to act, and then what type of action.
If I may, Madam Chair, I do have a couple questions for clarification before the board decides that I could ask Chris on. And are you proposing replacing the culvert or just lowering the existing culvert?
Right now, we're proposing to replace the culvert.
And then-
just because of its age.
Okay.
It's harder to reset it and have it be stable.
And then one other thing you had mentioned, the replacement cost of the culvert would be the DNR's expense?
Well, the DNR, as with any landowner, is responsible for their own culvert crossings, but we very often seen the drainage authority or the benefiting landowners pay for crossings for various repairs, and so that would be a discussion you probably need to have with your attorney as far as where you stand on replacement of those culverts that are for, I guess, private or public landowners crossing the drainage system.
Okay.
The costs that we had in here included the replacement cost of that culvert.
Okay. That's all the questions I had. So, so yes, the board, we would be asking the Drainage Authority to decide how you'd like to move on this with a motion, and then what we would do is prepare findings for that to present at the next board meeting for final approval of the repair.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Lepke?
what would your recommendation be?
So my recommendation would be is to move forward with a repair, keeping both alternatives open, keeping in mind the cost we've already portrayed to the public, and going through the regulatory process with DNR, and then going out for quotes and seeing if you can get quotes back for work that would be comparable to what we've indicated in our in the public hearing here today. That said, those costs can be quite variable, like I said, and it also is probably a good idea to do some coordination with your neighboring counties, and even potentially looking at other areas on your own drainage systems that that equipment might be utilized to double down on those costs a little bit.
And then my part two is this what the landowners would like us to do? Is that yeses if you raise your hand?
I think we've been pushing for it for a while.
Okay.
If I make another statement, the only thing is, Chris, what you said is on public or going across a ditch, and I understand that. This is DNR, there's no allowed motorized vehicle. Now, the only thing that they would ever use that for is if they want to go across, but I was stated that the lake's up so high that they can't really utilize and get into some areas. They haven't used it for a while, other than with a side-by-side. So there is no public use that can be used. Only DNR, if they feel they need to get across to spray or cut, is the only reason that culvert's in there. So to me, and I know a culvert is a small thing, but I'm also saying, as Jackie is hearing this too, as it goes out, I feel that that's a very small cost, and DNR is the only one that can use it. So.
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, if I
Yeah.
might, is that okay?
You make a motion, sure.
So, Madam Chair, I'm prepared to make a motion, but I'm going to ask Mr. Utters this very same question John just said, to say it one more time so that everyone can understand, because I'm going to move your recommendation of keeping both options open, of proceeding with the next steps. So I'm not sure what exactly we need today, but what Mr. Otten said is the motion I'm trying to make. So maybe you would say one more time your recommendation.
Sure. So the recommendation would be is to move forward with the repair, keeping both options open and pursuing both options and obtaining quotes from contractors to complete the work. Also to engage with the DNR to obtain regulatory approvals.
Can I stop you there then, if
Sure.
I might? So I think my motion is regarding 48A is to proceed with the repair process to keep both the cookie cutter and floating excavator options open and to take all necessary steps and communications to keep that process moving forward.
And I will second that.
Thank you. Any
Ms.
que-
Culvert, I'm assuming that's all we need today?
Yeah.
Okay, I think
Do
we-
you want to add anything to that motion about the DNR and submitting that we will have to get their approval first in order to
you
move
said
forward
that.
with this?
That's in there.
I think, I'm trying to keep it broad.
Okay.
Certainly the DNR is included, but there may be other departments, agencies, or others that need to be consulted. I don't want to limit it to the DNR. But certainly, I would expect that communication with the DNR would occur. I don't think the process can go forward without it.
Okay. I have one other question to make sure we cover that. Chris, we would want to enter into a contract for you to keep working on this because we are at the end of our current contract.
Correct.
And so I believe we would want to make a motion to continue working with Houston Engineering and to contract with them for the continuation of the repair project.
Do you want that as two separate motions? That's what I would think. So my recommendation would be let's go with that first motion and we'll come right back to that.
So we have the first motion and second on the floor. Are there any questions from the board or comments from the board on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Go ahead, Terry.
Okay. Madam Chair, if I can I would move that the county enter in the whatever necessary contract we would do to continue to have Houston Engineering work on the 48A ditch project.
I will second that.
Okay, questions from the board?
There is a question, would the Corps of Engineers be involved at all in this?
No.
That's good.
All those in
Well,
favor?
Madam Chair, if I just want to thank Mr. Arden. It's been very clear.
Yeah.
You've given contingencies, you've alerted us to price fluctuation, volatility, so I'm very grateful for the clarity in your communication to everybody.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Hearing no other comments, all those in favor?
Aye.
So at this point, staff will bring it back with findings.
We will prepare official findings and the order and bring that to our next Drainage Authority meeting for final approval.
There's a question.
Jackie, can you tell me about how many people are involved with dumping into this ditch? Like how many? When will we see that? Like how will that be?
I can visit with you. I don't know off the top of my head,
Okay.
but I can let you know.
All right.
I'd have to look at the records, how many landowners are in there.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing that will be coming back before the board is to approve the contract. So we'll get the contract in play, and then it will come back before the board to sign.
Okay,
Thank you.
sounds good.
Which
Thank
is
you.
just a continuation, basically, right?
Well, it would be a new contract because it
Okay.
would be for the repair itself. The contract that exists now is just for the study.
Okay, thank you.
Any other business before the Drainage Authority?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.